A battered old pickup rolled onto the private runway at Northridge Executive Airfield, its engine rumbling like an outsider intruding on sacred ground. Behind the tempered glass of the VIP lounge, polished executives in flawless suits paused mid-sip and stared. Their laughter was muted but unmistakable, because the man stepping out of that truck was not the kind of person they expected to see anywhere near a $70 million billionaire jet. Derrick Lawson, a black mechanic with scarred hands and a face carved by years of quiet struggle, lifted his worn toolbox as if he had carried the weight of a lifetime inside it. His boots hit the tarmac with a steady, unhurried rhythm. He heard every whisper, every scoff, every word dipped in contempt, and he absorbed them all with a silence so composed it felt dangerous. Parked before him, the Hale Falcon G700 gleamed under the Nevada sun like a jewel reserved only for the elite. From behind Derrick, a cold voice sliced through the desert heat. "Is this really the expert they sent for my jet? Or did we pick him up from a roadside garage by mistake?" Colton Reeves, the operations director, didn't even bother lowering his voice. More laughter, more eyes stabbing into Derrick's back. But Derrick didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. That unbroken calm, that quiet confidence, unsettled the room more than any protest ever could. And then everything shifted. A single pair of heels clicked across the runway, sharp as a metronome of power. Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale AeroDynamics, emerged from the terminal in a black suit that seemed tailored from pure authority. She didn't glance at her executives. She didn't entertain their doubts. Her eyes locked onto Derrick as if she saw something they had all missed. Let him work. 3 words, a command, not a suggestion. And in that instant the runway fell silent, though nobody yet understood why. What happened in the next 60 minutes would turn every smirk into fear, every prejudice into regret, and trigger a chain of events that would shake an entire industry. If stories of injustice turned triumph speak to you, take a second to subscribe now, because what you're about to witness is a shocking truth about hidden genius and real-life justice that you will not believe until you hear it yourself. The heat rising off the Northridge runway shimmered like a warning, but Derrick Lawson walked straight through it, shoulders steady, toolbox in hand. The metal latches on that old box rattled with every step, a tired chorus that clashed against the polished world around him. Behind the VIP lounge glass, executives paused their conversations, their eyes narrowing with the same rehearsed disdain. Some tilted their heads as if trying to understand how a man like him had wandered into a place built for men like them. Others didn't bother hiding their smirks. Derrick could feel their judgment pressing against his skin like static. He had felt that weight his entire life. It no longer bent him. He reached the side of the jet, set the toolbox down, and the sharp metallic thud drew more attention than it should have. A few executives exchanged amused glances, and then, from behind him, a voice coated with arrogance cut through the air. "That is the best mechanic they could find?" Colton Reeves stepped forward, immaculate suit, silver tie pin, hair perfectly in place, the kind of man who believed the world was designed to serve him. His eyes flicked over Derrick the way someone might glance at a piece of equipment they consider outdated. Derrick didn't turn, didn't rise to it. Instead, he opened his toolbox with a calm so controlled it almost felt like defiance. That restraint, that silence, was louder than a shout. Colton scoffed behind him, but something shifted on the runway before he could speak again. Heels clicked, precisely, rhythmically, like a countdown, resetting the room. Victoria Hale emerged from the terminal, black suit absorbing the sunlight, brown hair pulled into a flawless twist. She walked with the sharp, deliberate grace of someone accustomed to giving orders that shape markets. Conversations died instantly. Even Colton straightened. Victoria stopped beside Derrick, her presence altering the air around them. Derrick looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. His expression was composed, unreadable. Hers was assessing, razor-edged, almost intrigued. Their energy collided in a way that made the entire runway feel suddenly, inexplicably small. Derrick's voice, when he finally spoke, was steady. "I just need to see the system, ma'am. Nothing more." She nodded once, as if that was all she needed to hear. For a moment no one spoke. No one even breathed. It was as if the runway itself sensed that what was about to unfold between this quiet mechanic and this commanding CEO would tear apart everything these executives thought they understood about power, brilliance, and the value of a man they had already decided was beneath them. Derrick stepped beneath the wing of the Hale Falcon G700, the shadow of the jet falling over him like the mouth of a giant he was about to tame. He pressed his palm to the main access panel, feeling the residual heat from the engines, then unlatched it with a practiced motion. The metal door swung open, revealing the tangled anatomy of the aircraft's pressurization and electrical systems. Most mechanics saw a maze. Derrick saw a pulse, a rhythm, a language only he seemed to understand. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, steady, deliberate, impossibly controlled. Each wire he touched, each component he traced, seemed to speak to him. Something was wrong. Not the surface-level glitch the other technicians had blamed, not even close. He leaned in deeper, fingertips gliding along the pressure manifold, following the faintest vibration, the kind only someone who had spent thousands of hours inside aircraft guts could detect. His brow tightened. There it was, the fault line everyone else had missed. A catastrophic failure in the pressurization control unit, hidden beneath a cluster of perfectly functioning sensors. If this jet had taken off, the cabin wouldn't have held. At 45,000 feet, the air inside would have been sucked out in seconds. No alarms, no warnings, just silence, then death. Derrick exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself before opening the chest of a dying patient. He reached into the panel, pulling tools one by one, his motion smooth and fast, almost too fast for the eye to follow. The runway behind him buzzed with faint conversation, but he heard none of it. His world narrowed to metal, pressure flows, valve behavior, and a rhythm he needed to restore before time ran out. Inside the terminal, Victoria Hale watched through the glass. Moments earlier, she had studied Derrick with curiosity. Now, something deeper flickered in her expression. Respect, recognition, as if she were watching someone perform a masterpiece the rest of the room didn't even know they were witnessing. Each time Derrick tightened a bolt, recalibrated a line, or reset a circuit, her posture shifted. This wasn't luck. This wasn't guesswork. This was brilliance in motion. Hidden genius revealed not by words, but by work. Derrick didn't glance up. He didn't pause to double-check his instincts. He trusted them. And he trusted the years of knowledge no one on that runway had ever cared to ask about. His movements grew faster, more certain, like a conductor guiding an orchestra only he could hear. But beneath that fluid confidence was a tension rising with every second. He knew how close this jet had been to disaster. He knew how quickly the situation could have escalated. What he didn't know was that every motion he made was rewriting the way Victoria saw him, and soon the way the entire company and the entire industry would see him. When he reconnected the final line and sealed the system, his fingers slowed. He let the engine hum settle. The pressure gauge steadied, balance restored. Derrick closed the panel with a quiet click, the kind of sound only the person who saved a dozen lives would ever appreciate. Silence fell again across the runway, not from contempt this time, but from anticipation. Something was shifting, something enormous. And Derrick Lawson, the man they had dismissed as a roadside mechanic, had just taken the first step toward turning their world inside out. Victoria didn't waste a second. The moment Derrick stepped back from the jet, she turned on her heel and said two words that sliced through the stagnant airport air. "Follow me." No explanation, no hesitation, just authority sharp enough to draw blood. Derrick picked up his worn toolbox and walked behind her, his steps echoing through the polished corridor of the executive terminal. The farther they went from the runway, the quieter it grew, until the world outside felt like it had been sealed behind a pressure door. Victoria opened a private office, one guarded by frosted glass and a biometric lock. She gestured for him to enter, then shut the door with a heavy finality. For a moment, there was only silence. She studied him the way a scientist studies a rare phenomenon she has finally trapped long enough to observe. Then she spoke, her voice low but razor-edged. "Do you know how impossible it is to fix what you just fixed?" Derrick stayed still, face unreadable. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Let me rephrase that. Do you know how many people in this building could have identified that failure before it killed everyone on board? Not one. Except you. She crossed to her desk, waking the tablet with a tap. Papers, schematics, and archived documents filled the screen in rapid succession. And then she said the words that shifted the ground beneath him. Because you built it, didn't you? Derrick's breath caught, not visibly, but enough for her to notice. Victoria turned the tablet around. Blueprints, system, architecture, original G7 pressurization schematics, and at the bottom corner of every page, etched in clean engineer's script, were two letters, DL, Derrick Lawson. Victoria's voice dropped. You designed the system that keeps half of our fleet in the air. 5 years ago, before you were fired, before someone else took the credit. Derrick's jaw tightened, the first crack in his calm exterior, the first sign of something burning beneath the surface. She leaned forward. Colton Reeves submitted these designs as his own. He was promoted 3 times because of them. He earns bonuses off your work, your creation, your brilliance. She let the words hang like a blade suspended over truth. Derrick finally spoke, his tone even, but edged with something darker. It doesn't matter. I needed a job, and mechanics pay their bills. Victoria shook her head. No, it matters. It matters because I've suspected something was wrong with our engineering department for a long time. It matters because your name didn't disappear by accident. It was erased. Derrick held her gaze. For the first time, he didn't look invincible. He looked wounded, but not broken. A man who had survived something most never even recognized. Victoria tapped the tablet again. More documents, more evidence, a timeline of stolen credit, buried innovations, suppressed names. I've been investigating this for months, she said, voice tightening. And everything, every anomaly, every discrepancy, keeps leading back to you, to what happened 5 years ago. Derrick didn't move, didn't blink. But the air around him changed. The calm he carried like armor began to shift. Victoria felt it. A silent storm forming beneath his composure. She stepped closer. Tell me the truth, Derrick. Did you build the G7 system? The question wasn't a question. It was a revelation. And in the stillness of that private room, far from the laughter, far from the runway, where he'd just been ridiculed, Derrick Lawson finally allowed the truth to exist out loud. Yes, his voice was soft, controlled, hauntingly steady. But that one word detonated the entire narrative of the morning. Victoria exhaled slowly, not in shock, but in vindication. She had been right. And now, nothing would remain the same. For her, for him, or for the man who had stolen everything he built. The story was no longer about a mechanic fixing a jet. It was about a buried genius pulled back into the light, and the empire that was about to crack open because of it. The door burst open so violently it slammed against the wall, shaking the glass panels in their frames. Colton Reeves stormed in without knocking, without permission, without even pretending to respect the space he'd just invaded. His voice came first, raised, sharp, frantic. Victoria, we have a board call in 5 minutes. We do not have time for this. Then he saw Derrick standing beside her desk, calm, steady, unreadable. The shift in Colton's face was immediate. Panic flickered behind the practiced arrogance. What is he doing here? His tone was accusatory, almost desperate. Derrick didn't answer. He didn't even turn. And that silence, that quiet authority, unnerved Colton more than any words could have. Victoria stepped away from her desk, tablet in hand, her movements icy and deliberate. We're discussing something important, she said, something you've tried very hard to bury. Colton straightened, forcing a laugh that cracked at the edges. I don't know what he told you, but whatever this is, it can wait. We have real issues to deal with. Victoria ignored him completely. Instead, she tapped her tablet, and the air in the room shifted. Documents illuminated the screen, blueprints, signatures, archived reports. With a single motion, she projected one page toward him, the original G7 schematic. His name typed at the top. But just beneath it, highlighted like a wound that refused to close, were the initials DL. Derrick Lawson. Victoria's voice was a weapon now, each word landing with precision. You submitted this design. You accepted promotions because of it. You built your career on what didn't belong to you. Colton's face drained of color. That's ridiculous, he snapped, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He was an assistant, a helper. He didn't contribute anything significant. Victoria's expression didn't change. Really? Because I also have these. She flicked her finger. A string of emails appeared, internal messages, requests, recommendations, including one from Colton dated 5 years ago, urging HR to fire Derrick Lawson for technical incompetence. Sent exactly 3 days after Derrick submitted the full G7 design to the development database. Colton froze, his mouth half open, as if the words had been ripped out before he could speak them. The room went still. Derrick watched the exchange in total silence, his expression controlled, his breathing even, and that quiet presence, unshaken, unbothered, felt like a spotlight aimed directly at Colton's guilt. Victoria took a step toward him, her voice lowered, which somehow made it more dangerous. You didn't expect this to come back, did you? You thought if you hid the right files and silenced the right people, no one would ever question your brilliance. But you underestimated the one thing you never should have: the truth. Colton's composure cracked. He reached for excuses, for explanations, for anything that would stop the room from closing in on him. I was supervising him. Anything he did was under my direction. That makes it my work. Victoria cut through the lie instantly. No, it makes you a thief. Before he could answer, she delivered the final blow. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all duties pending a full internal investigation. Turn in your badge to security on your way out. For a heartbeat, Colton didn't move. His eyes jumped from Victoria to Derrick, as if searching for a lifeline. But Derrick's stillness was worse than condemnation. It was judgment delivered without a single word. Colton finally stumbled back, outrage and fear twisting together. You can't do this, he spat. The board will never approve it. Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice to a level that forced him to listen. The board will be informed. In 1 hour. Leave now. The last thread holding Colton's facade together snapped. He turned, slammed the door, and disappeared down the hall. Silence swept into the room like a gust of cold air. Slowly, Victoria looked back at Derrick. The storm had broken, but the real battle had only just begun. Victoria didn't sit down after Colton stormed out. She didn't breathe in relief, didn't celebrate the small victory she had just carved out of a corrupt system. Instead, she walked to the window of her private office, staring down at the runway where Derrick had been mocked only an hour earlier. Her voice, when it finally came, was quieter than before, but heavier. He wasn't the first Derrick, not even close. Derrick lifted his eyes. The weight of those words settled into the room like dust from a long collapsing ceiling. Victoria turned back toward him, and for the first time since they met, he saw something behind her authority. Fatigue. Not weakness, but the exhaustion of someone who had carried a truth too big, too dangerous, for too long. For the past 2 years, she said, I've been investigating irregularities in our engineering and development divisions. Patterns, missing files, career paths that ended abruptly for no logical reason. Her words came slowly at first, then gathered speed, sharper with every sentence. And every time I thought I'd reached the bottom, I found another layer buried underneath. She tapped her tablet again. This time, not blueprints, not system logs, but personnel records. 7 profiles appeared across the screen, 7 faces, 7 names, 7 brilliant engineers who shared one thing in common. They were all either black or Latino, all had glowing performance reviews, all had made groundbreaking contributions, and all had been terminated under the same excuse: technical incompetence. Derrick stared at the screen, each face a mirror of a past he had learned to swallow. He didn't move, didn't speak. But his silence held a lifetime of recognition, a lifetime of being told he wasn't enough, when the truth was that he had been too much for people who feared what he might become. Victoria continued, her voice gaining force. These people weren't dismissed because of mistakes. They were dismissed because their ideas were valuable enough for someone else to steal. Your case was just the cleanest, the most documented, the hardest to bury completely. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Colton didn't just try to erase you, Derrick. He was part of a system designed to erase anyone who didn't fit their image of what brilliance should look like. A knock sounded on the door, not abrupt like Colton's, but firm and controlled. Victoria opened it, and Dr. Naomi Price stepped in, carrying a thick black folder pressed tightly under one arm. She was composed, serious, the kind of legal mind who could take down a corporation armed with nothing but a pen. Naomi shook Derrick's hand, not out of formality, but out of respect. "I've verified everything," she said. "Every deletion, every forged signature, every manipulated personnel file." Her tone carried a gravity that left little room for doubt. "What happened to you was not an accident, it was orchestrated." Victoria nodded, her jaw tight. "Naomi has been helping me build a case, a real case, one that exposes not just Colton, but the entire structure that allowed him to operate unchecked for years." She approached Derrick slowly, as if she understood the impact these revelations were having on him. "You didn't just lose a job, Derrick. You lost the life you were meant to have. And they did it because they thought no one would ever question them." Something shifted in Derrick's expression. A flicker, subtle but unmistakable. For the first time, the calm he wore like armor cracked, revealing the anger beneath it. Not the explosive kind, the quiet kind that built over years of humiliation, years of talent wasted, years of dreams sabotaged by people who feared what he could achieve. Victoria watched him, then spoke with a conviction that seemed to anchor the entire room. "You weren't wrong all those years, Derrick. You weren't imagining things. You were targeted, silenced. But not anymore." Naomi opened the black folder and placed it gently on the desk in front of him. Inside were reports, testimonies, timestamps, archived files that should have been deleted, but never were. Evidence, undeniable, unshakable evidence. As Derrick looked over the documents, something inside him loosened. A weight he had carried for half a decade shifted, finally, from his shoulders. It wasn't joy, it wasn't triumph. It was vindication, pure and absolute. For the first time since he had been escorted out of the engineering department like a criminal, someone had given him what he thought he would never receive, the truth, and with it, the first real chance at justice. Victoria stepped closer, her voice steady. "This is bigger than you or me. But it starts with you, because they chose the wrong man to erase, the wrong genius to bury, and now everything they built on your stolen work is about to fall." Derrick closed the folder slowly. When he looked up, the calm had returned. But it was different now, stronger, sharper. This time it wasn't the calm of a man enduring injustice. It was the calm of a man preparing to confront it. And Victoria knew, in that moment, that the fight ahead had just gained its strongest weapon. Derrick didn't speak right away. He closed the black folder Naomi had given him, rested his palms lightly on the table, and let the silence stretch. Not an awkward silence, a calculated one. The kind that made both women realize he wasn't overwhelmed. He was choosing his next move. When he finally looked up, there was a different clarity in his eyes, a sharpened focus. A man who had spent 5 years being underestimated was about to reveal just how dangerous that mistake had been. "Everything you've shown me," he said quietly, "I already knew." Victoria frowned, not in confusion, but in anticipation. Derrick reached for his toolbox, the same battered box the executives had mocked, and flipped open a hidden compartment along the bottom. Inside wasn't a wrench or a coil of wire. It was a slim, dustless stack of drives, carefully labeled, meticulously protected. "I kept the original design files," he said, lifting one of the drives between his fingers. "The real G7 schematics, dated, digitally signed, immutable." He placed it gently on the table like a piece of evidence in a courtroom. Victoria blinked, stunned for the first time since he'd met her. Naomi leaned in, studying the label, her eyes widening. Derrick wasn't finished. He pulled out a second drive. "And I kept the prototype logs, too. every line of code, every pressure test, every flaw I fixed before anyone even knew the system existed. He tapped the drive. It contained years of innovation that had been wiped from the company servers. Except Derrick had anticipated that. He had saved everything. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he reached deeper into the compartment and revealed a small recorder. Old, scratched, a relic compared to modern data tools. But the moment Naomi saw it, her breath caught. Derrick turned it in his hand. "This," he said, "is the conversation Colton thought he ended. 5 years ago, in a conference room with no cameras. He explained exactly how he planned to erase my name from the system, step by step, word for word." He paused. "And how to discredit me if I ever tried to speak up." Victoria's posture changed entirely. This wasn't just incriminating. This was nuclear. Before she could react, Derrick placed a final drive on the table, thicker, older, the label handwritten. Naomi picked it up carefully, reading the date stamps on the side. 10 years of engineering records, internal audits, budget discrepancies, procurement reports. Derrick nodded. A decade of technical corruption, every stolen idea, every manipulated project, every engineer whose work was taken before they could attach their names. He met Victoria's stare evenly. "I didn't just keep evidence for myself. I kept evidence for everyone they silenced." For a moment, Victoria couldn't speak. Her breath left her in a slow, disbelieving exhale. She had expected brilliance from Derrick. She had expected resilience, maybe even genius. But she had not expected this, a level of foresight, strategy, and restraint that rivaled the most seasoned executives she had ever worked with. "You were planning this," she whispered, not accusing, but acknowledging. Derrick shook his head. "Not planning, preparing. There's a difference. Planning means expecting the fight. Preparing means surviving long enough to win it." The room felt smaller now, charged with the weight of what this man had endured and the magnitude of what he had gathered. Victoria straightened, her eyes fierce, almost reverent. "You're not just the engineer they cast aside. You're the only person in this company who was thinking 10 steps ahead while everyone else was fighting to stay 1 step above the truth." Derrick didn't smile. He didn't need to. His silence carried more power than any words could. Naomi finally broke it, her voice hushed. "With this, we can bring down the entire network. We can expose everything." Victoria looked at Derrick again, but this time with something entirely new. Respect so deep it bordered on awe. He wasn't just the hidden genius whose ideas powered the company. He was the strategist who had quietly built the very arsenal they would need to dismantle a corrupt empire. And for the first time, Victoria realized the truth. Derrick Lawson hadn't simply survived the injustice done to him. He had outsmarted it, outmaneuvered it. And now, standing in her office with a decade of truth in his hands, he was about to destroy it. In the days that followed, Hale AeroDynamics shifted from a quiet corporate machine into a battleground. Victoria Hale moved through the headquarters like a force of nature, assembling teams, pulling confidential files, demanding audits with a precision that rattled every department head. And in the center of it all, standing beside her, never raising his voice, never losing his composure, was Derrick Lawson, a man the world still believed was just a mechanic. Victoria spent long nights in the executive conference hall preparing for what she called the most important presentation of her career. She rewrote it again and again, perfecting each slide, each statistic, each piece of evidence. Because this wasn't simply a meeting, it was an execution, a reckoning, a rebirth. On the morning of the extraordinary shareholders' summit, hundreds of the company's most powerful investors filled the gleaming auditorium. Men and women who had shaped markets, directed fortunes, and rarely heard the word no. The whispering began the moment Derrick walked in behind Victoria. They recognized her. But him? They didn't know what to make of the quiet man with the steady posture and the eyes that held a lifetime of truth. The lights dimmed. Victoria stepped onto the stage. Her presence alone silenced the room. She began calmly, almost gently, recounting Hale AeroDynamics' innovations, profits, and milestones. Then Her tone shifted, and she said the words that made the room freeze. For the past decade, our engineering legacy has been built on lies. Gasps rippled through the audience. Behind her, the screen came to life. Documents, emails, personnel records. Then, with a nod to the technicians in the booth, she signaled for the recording. A chilling voice filled the auditorium. It was Colton Reeves. The same arrogance, the same calculated tone, and every sentence was a blade. We need to eliminate Lawson's authorship, clean the files, replace his initials. Who would believe someone like him could design anything at this level? Our clients trust us, not people like that. The room erupted, not with applause, but with outrage. Investors stood from their seats, tension snapping through the air like live wires. Some demanded answers, others cursed under their breath, but all of them now saw the truth without filters, without excuses. Victoria let the recording play to the end. Then she said, "Today, we correct that injustice. And today, Hale AeroDynamics becomes a company worthy of the future it claims to build." Security entered the aisles. Colton Reeves, pale and shaking, tried to slip out the side door, but the board had been notified. He was stopped, escorted forward, and forced to stand before the very people whose money he had spent years deceiving. This was not humiliation. This was obliteration. His reputation, gone. His credibility, ashes. His career, finished in a matter of minutes. Victoria turned back to the audience. The damage he caused will take time to undo. Our stock will drop, our confidence will shake, but we are not falling apart. We are being rebuilt. Her words proved prophetic. Within hours, the media storm hit. Headlines exploded across every major outlet. Hale AeroDynamics stock plummeted by 18%. Investors panicked. Employees whispered. Analysts predicted collapse. But then, something remarkable happened. When Victoria announced the Integrity Reclamation Initiative, a sweeping program to identify, compensate, and restore every stolen innovation from the past decade, public sentiment began to shift. Transparency replaced concealment, reform replaced tradition, and the world watched as Hale AeroDynamics transformed from a symbol of corruption into a blueprint for ethical rebirth. Within 3 months, the stock rebounded. Within 6, it surpassed its previous peak. Clients returned. Communities rallied. And at the center of this resurrection was the man they had once dismissed, the man they had erased. When Victoria introduced Derrick Lawson at the next leadership summit, the applause didn't just fill the room, it shook it. She announced his new title, Director of Innovation, a seat at the executive table, a role he should have held 5 years earlier. Derrick stood at the podium, not triumphant, not boastful, but steady, grounded, resolute. A man who had rebuilt his future and reshaped an entire corporation without ever raising his voice. A man who had proven that brilliance needs no permission, and justice, once awakened, is unstoppable. In that moment, every shareholder, every executive, every skeptic knew one truth. This was not the rise of a mechanic. This was the rise of a visionary. And the company that had tried to bury him was now surviving because of him. In the months that followed the corporate upheaval, Derrick Lawson did something no one in the industry expected. While reporters chased him for interviews and engineers from elite universities begged to work under him, Derrick disappeared from the spotlight. Not to rest, not to celebrate, but to build something the world didn't even know it needed. On the edge of the neighborhood where he grew up, a place most city maps ignored and most funding bypassed, an abandoned warehouse stood collecting dust and broken dreams. Derrick bought it in silence. No press release, no ribbon cutting, just a key, a vision, and a determination forged from the years he had been told he didn't belong. He gutted the building from the inside out, rewired it himself, installed ventilation systems more advanced than some commercial hangars. When Victoria Hale visited for the first time, she stopped in the doorway, stunned. Rows of pristine workbenches, high-powered computers, 3D printers, simulation labs, and on the center wall, painted in clean, bold letters, were the words, Lawson Technology Center. Derrick didn't want applause. He wanted access. For kids who'd never been invited into the rooms where futures were designed. For students with brilliance too raw to be recognized by traditional schools. For the young version of himself, the boy who had taken apart radios on his front porch because his family couldn't afford store-bought toys. That boy deserved a place like this, so Derrick built it. The community noticed first, then the city, then the industry. Because within the very first year, something extraordinary happened. Not one, not two, but 3 original patents were filed under the Lawson Technology Center's student program. Innovations dreamt up by teenagers who had never touched professional equipment before walking through those doors. The kind of ideas corporations used to steal from people like them. But now, their names were on the paperwork. Their futures belonged to them. Derrick watched them work. Kids with no reason to believe the world cared about their minds, now sketching blueprints that stunned visiting engineers. He guided them with the same quiet steadiness he carried on the runway that morning. He never raised his voice. He never used his title. He simply stood behind them, gently redirecting, reminding them that their ideas mattered. Parents who once feared their children had no path forward now stood outside the center's glass walls, watching their sons and daughters model aerodynamic components and design pressure-resistant materials. Hope wasn't a faraway concept anymore. It was happening in real time, in the very neighborhood the world had overlooked for decades. And Derrick didn't stop there. He established scholarship pipelines, internship partnerships. He created a system that ensured no student, no matter their zip code, skin color, or bank account, would have to claw their way into opportunity the way he did. Every time a young mind lit up with understanding, every time a prototype hummed to life, Derrick felt something inside him settle. A pain he'd carried for years, easing with every breakthrough these students achieved. The Lawson Technology Center wasn't just a building. It was a declaration, a promise, a reclaiming of brilliance that had been suppressed for far too long. It was the opening of a door that had been welded shut for generations, and once opened, it refused to close again. The world had tried to erase Derrick Lawson. Instead, he built a place where no one like him would ever disappear again. In the glow of the Lawson Technology Center's success, the industry began whispering a new name, Derrick Lawson, not as a mechanic, not as a footnote, but as a force. And no one understood that better than Victoria Hale. She visited the center often, sometimes unannounced, sometimes just to stand in the doorway and observe how naturally Derrick commanded a room without ever raising his voice. She watched him teach, mentor, guide, elevate. She watched students lean in, their eyes bright, absorbing every word as if he were passing down a sacred craft. And each time, something deepened in her expression. Respect, admiration, recognition of a mind that didn't just solve problems, it created futures. One evening, after the last students had gone home and the center had settled into a warm, humming quiet, Victoria found Derrick repairing a 3D printer. His sleeves were rolled up, forearms streaked with grease, the same way they had been the day she first saw him on the runway, but his presence was different now, fuller, rooted, certain. She hesitated before speaking, unusual for a woman who usually navigated boardrooms with the ease of someone crossing a street. "Derrick," she said gently, "I have a proposal." He looked up, curious. She stepped closer, placing a folder on the workbench, a contract, but not the kind used to bury someone, the kind used to build something monumental. "Hale AeroDynamics wants to partner with Lawson Engineering," she said. "Not absorb it, not acquire it. Partner." 50-50, Derrick asked. She shook her head. "Better, 30% equity for you, 30% influence, 30% power, full creative control over all innovation initiatives." Derrick blinked, slowly, not out of shock, but out of measured consideration. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a favor. This was acknowledgement. An acknowledgement that his brilliance wasn't just valuable, it was indispensable. Victoria continued, her voice steady but warm. "Your company may be small, but it's the heart of what the future could look like. And I want that heart inside Hale AeroDynamics, not hidden, not overshadowed, celebrated." It wasn't lost on either of them what this meant. A man who had once been escorted out of the building like a criminal was now being asked to reshape its very foundation. The irony wasn't bitter, it was poetic. When the partnership was announced at the next executive meeting, the reactions were instantaneous. Some jaws dropped, some hands trembled. A few executives, those accustomed to the old world, the old power, the old biases, quietly submitted resignations before the meeting ended. They had no interest in serving under a man they once mocked. They didn't belong in the new era Hale AeroDynamics was building. But many stayed, and they watched, stunned, as Derrick took his seat at the executive table, not at the far end, not in the corner, but beside Victoria, equal in authority, equal in influence, equal in destiny. The partnership was more than a business deal. It was the moment two brilliant minds aligned, not through hierarchy, but through mutual respect. Victoria brought corporate reach, infrastructure, and global leverage. Derrick brought raw genius, ground-level innovation, and a moral compass that ran deeper than any mission statement. Together, they formed a new axis, Hale and Lawson, a coalition that terrified competitors and inspired the next generation. And while the industry scrambled to understand how a mechanic had become a visionary leader, Derrick never forgot where he came from. He checked on his students. He returned to his workbench. He kept his hands in the craft that had shaped him. But now, when he lifted that same toolbox, the world no longer saw a mechanic walking onto a runway. It saw a strategist, a partner, a creator of futures. The partnership didn't just elevate Derrick, it redefined what leadership could look like. And as the contracts were signed and the new division launched, Victoria looked over at him with a sincerity few ever saw. "I'm not offering you a seat at the table, Derrick. I'm rebuilding the table with you." And for the first time in a very long time, Derrick allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Not for the power, not for the title, but for the truth that carried him here. Brilliance doesn't fade when the world ignores it. It waits, then rises, then leads. 1 year later, the world looked very different for Hale AeroDynamics. The company that had once teetered on the edge of collapse was now preparing for a landmark event, one that promised not just innovation, but redemption. Inside the massive unveiling hall, reporters, engineers, investors, and industry titans filled every seat, buzzing with speculation. Cameras hovered, voices echoed. Everyone was there to witness what had been whispered about for months. The debut of a propulsion system rumored to cut fuel consumption by 40%. A breakthrough many believed impossible until Derrick Lawson arrived. The lights dimmed, and the stage ignited with a slow, rising glow. Victoria Hale stepped forward, her presence commanding, her voice amplified across the hall. "Exactly 1 year ago," she began, "a man walked onto a runway and was laughed at while saving lives." She let the words land, sharp and honest. "A year ago, brilliance was mocked. A year ago, genius was dismissed. A year ago, our own biases nearly cost us everything." The crowd went still. Victoria gestured toward the wings, and a tall, quiet figure emerged. Derrick Lawson stepped onto the stage with the same steady gait he'd had that first morning, the gait of a man who never needed applause to know his worth. But today the applause came anyway. A thunderous wave that rose to the ceiling. It wasn't polite. It wasn't symbolic. It was reverence. Behind him, the massive display lit up with the new propulsion system, a sleek, re-engineered engine core bearing the Lawson-Hale insignia. Data flooded the screen, performance charts, efficiency curves, fuel reductions that defied the industry's most optimistic projections. Engineers in the audience leaned forward, jaws slack. Reporters stared, stunned. Even seasoned investors felt their breath hitch. This wasn't just an upgrade. It was a revolution. As the applause softened, Victoria continued. "He designed this. He led the team. He refused to let the future be dictated by the limitations of the past. And I am proud, deeply proud, to say that today Hale AeroDynamics stands because he stood." But then she paused. Her tone softened. "And now I want to introduce someone who deserves to see what her son has built." From the front row, slowly rising with the help of a cane, was Mrs. Loretta Lawson, Derrick's mother, 72 years old. A woman who had worked night shifts cleaning corporate buildings so her child could stay in school. When the spotlight found her, her eyes glimmered, not in shock, but in the kind of pride that only comes from surviving hardship long enough to witness the impossible. Derrick froze for a heartbeat, emotion flickering through the calm he wore like armor. He helped her onto the stage. She touched the engine model gently, as if it were something fragile, something holy. Tears welled, but she held them, standing tall beside her son. The hall fell silent. No one dared break the moment. Derrick stepped forward to the microphone. For the first time, his voice filled a room built for leaders who once shut him out. "A year ago," he said softly, "I was a man people looked through, worked around, ignored. A man whose ideas were dismissed before they were understood. But today—" He looked at his mother, then at the students from his community center seated near the back. "Today, I am not here because I climbed over the walls built in front of me. I am here because I chose to tear them down." The room seemed to inhale. Justice does not end when one person rises. Justice begins when the generation behind them doesn't have to struggle the same way. His voice grew stronger, resonant. Real justice is not individual. It is structural. It is shared. It is inherited. The hall erupted, standing ovation, roaring applause, cameras flashing. But Derrick didn't stand in the glow of it. He stepped back beside his mother, letting the moment belong not to ego, but to truth. As the event neared its close, he leaned briefly toward the microphone once more. If stories like this matter to you, stories about justice, resilience, and rebuilding what was broken, stay with us. Subscribe, share, speak up, because change isn't just witnessed, it's carried forward. The lights dimmed, the applause continued, and high above the stage the Hale insignia gleamed, a symbol of an industry reborn, a legacy reclaimed, and a future no longer bound by the prejudices of the past. In the end, Derrick Lawson's story was never just about a mechanic who proved everyone wrong. It was about a man who refused to let the world define his worth, even when that world mocked him, erased him, and tried to bury the brilliance he carried quietly in his hands. He took humiliation and turned it into fuel. He took injustice and reshaped an entire industry around it. And more importantly, he opened a door that had been locked for generations, a door through which countless young minds would one day walk without fear, without doubt, without being told they didn't belong. The journey from the runway to the executive boardroom wasn't a fair rise. It was a necessary reckoning. Derrick didn't climb the ladder, he rebuilt it, and every step he took forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. Real justice isn't granted to one person at a time. Real justice changes the structure, not just the story. It transforms a system so completely that those who come after never have to fight the same battles. Today, Derrick stands as a symbol, not of revenge, but of restoration, not of triumph over others, but of triumph for others. The young engineers in his community center, the students designing their first prototypes, the voices once silenced now speaking with confidence. They are the legacy he created, and that legacy will outlive every prejudice that once tried to contain him. His story reminds us of something powerful. Sometimes the greatest act of dignity is not overcoming the wall in front of you. It is tearing that wall down so no one else ever has to climb it again. If stories of justice, renewal, and extraordinary resilience speak to you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Your voice helps carry these stories further and helps ensure that the next Derrick Lawson never has to wait years for the world to see who he truly is.